A canyon in Colorado. October. The sky is the kind of blue that hurts your eyes. A wagon on a dirt road. Two mules. A woman tied at the wrists in the back. 40 feet above the road. A pile of red rock. A rifle laid across a flat stone. A man with a scar from temple to cheekbone. Beside him. A woman, 22 years old. A gray traveling dress. Hair the wind has gotten into. A wooden finch in the pocket above her heart. 6 days ago, she was a piano teacher's daughter in Boston. 6 days ago, her father was alive. Below on the road, a heavy-set man on a black horse looks up. He smiles the way a man smiles when his package has arrived. She stands. She does not mean to. She does. She looks down at him from the red Colorado stone, and the wind moves her dress, and she opens her mouth to say a sentence that has been waiting 2 months to be said. A pistol comes up. 3 shots. Inside 1 heartbeat. Boston, late summer of 1882. The piano stopped mid-note. Eleanor Bell knew the moment she heard the silence, because her father never stopped a Chopin nocturne halfway. He finished. Always. Even when the kettle whistled. Even when the landlord pounded the door. Even when his hand shook so bad he had to play it twice to get it right. But that afternoon, the music stopped, and Eleanor was in the kitchen slicing the last apple they owned into 4 very small pieces, so they would last 2 days, maybe 3 if she chewed slow. She set the knife down. She listened. Nothing. Not the creak of the piano bench, not her father humming the way he did when he was working something out, not the soft tap of his foot on the floorboards, just the gas lamp hissing, and the August heat pressing against the windows like a hand. She walked into the parlor. Thaddeus Bell was sitting on the piano bench, still, both hands resting on the keys, eyes open, looking at the sheet music as if he was still reading it. Eleanor said, "Papa." He did not turn. She said it again, "Papa." The room held its breath. She crossed the rug in 3 steps. She put her hand on his shoulder. And her father, who had taught her to read music before she could write her own name, who had given piano lessons to half the children on Beacon Hill for 30 years, who had hummed Bach over her cradle, leaned softly to the left and slid off the bench onto the rug. The doctor came at 7. He said acute pneumonia, sudden onset. Sometimes it takes them like this, especially in men of his age. Eleanor said he was singing this morning. The doctor said, "I am sorry, miss." He wrote a paper. He left. And Eleanor sat on the rug next to her father and held his hand until it went cold. She was 22 years old. She had no mother, no siblings, no money, no husband. She had a piano, a small apartment with 2 months' rent owing, and a father whose body the city would come collect in the morning. She buried him on a Tuesday. 6 people came. 2 of his former students. The landlord who came because he wanted to remind her about the rent. The minister's wife. And an old man named Mr. Pickering, who had been her father's friend since the war, and who pressed $3 into her palm at the gravesite and said Tad would not want you crying for him, child. He would want you eating. Eleanor ate that night, a bowl of broth, standing up at the kitchen counter, because she could not bear to sit at the table. And then she went into her father's room. She opened the drawer in his nightstand, looking for what she did not know. A letter, a note, a reason, something. She found a Bible. She found a tin of mints. She found a folded paper. She unfolded it. It was a letter, 2 months old, postmarked Silver Hollow, Colorado. The handwriting was thick and slanted, pressed deep into the paper. The kind of writing a man does when he wants you to feel his weight from 1,000 miles away. Mr. Bell, this is the second notice. Your account remains unsettled. The sum of $4,200 is now considered past due. I trust a man of your standing will not require a third notice. I have business associates in Boston who handle these matters with discretion. I would prefer not to involve them. But discretion comes at a cost. Yours, Bartholomew Vaughn, Mayor, First Bank of Silver Hollow, Colorado Territory. Eleanor read it 3 times. Her father had never been to Colorado in his life. Her father had never borrowed $4,200 from anyone. Her father played piano for $12 a week. She turned the letter over. On the back in her father's small, steady hand was a single line of pencil writing. Caleb Hawthorne, Silver Hollow. He owes me one. He will know what to do. Eleanor sat on the edge of her father's bed for a long time. The lamp ran out of oil. The room went dark. She did not light another. She thought about the bowl of apple slices on the counter, cut so small they would last 2 days, 3 if she chewed slow. She thought about her father leaning softly to the left. She thought about a name she had never heard, Caleb Hawthorne, and she thought, he will know what to do. She wrote the letter that night. She wrote it 3 times. The first 2 she tore up. The third she sealed in her father's envelope, the kind he had used for his music students' invoices. Cream-colored, thin, honest. She walked it to the post office in the morning. She did not eat that day. And then she waited. She waited 4 weeks. In those 4 weeks, she sold the piano. She sold 2 of her father's wool coats. She sold the silver candlesticks her mother had brought to the marriage in 1857. She did not sell her father's wedding ring. She did not sell the small wooden bird he had whittled for her when she was 6. A finch, smooth from 40 years of her thumb running over it. Those she put in her trunk. The landlord came on a Friday. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand and he said, "Miss Bell, it has been kind of me to wait, but I have a man wanting the apartment by the 1st of October. Eleanor said, I understand. He said, I am sorry for your loss. She said, I know. He left. She had 23 days. And no letter from Silver Hollow. That same week, the second letter arrived. It was not from Caleb Hawthorne. It was from Bartholomew Vaughn, Mayor of Silver Hollow, Colorado Territory. Eleanor opened it, standing in the hallway in her stocking feet, hair still wet from washing it in the kitchen basin. Miss Bell, I write to you in the deepest sympathy. The passing of your father has reached me by way of mutual associates in Boston. Your father and I, before his untimely sickness, had begun a correspondence of a personal nature. He was a man of fine character. I had begun to consider the possibility, with his blessing, of inviting his only daughter West to take up the responsibilities of becoming my wife. I am a widower. I am a man of means. My household is in need of a woman of grace and Christian upbringing. I am told you are such a woman. I have enclosed sufficient funds for your passage by train. The remainder of your father's account with the bank will be considered settled upon your safe arrival in Silver Hollow, Colorado, where you and I may discuss our future face to face. I trust you will not refuse a path that your dear father in his final letters indicated he favored. Yours faithfully, Bartholomew Vaughn. There was a banknote inside the envelope. $80. Eleanor sat down on the floor of the hallway because her legs would not hold her, because her father had not in his life written to any man named Vaughn about marrying off his daughter, because her father had not in his life sat down with a Colorado banker and discussed her future, because her father did not have a Colorado banker, because Bartholomew Vaughn was lying. But the $80 was real, and the apartment was due in 23 days, and there was no letter from Caleb Hawthorne. Eleanor lit a candle that night, and she stood at the kitchen window, and she looked out at the gas lamps of Beacon Hill, and she said out loud to no one, "Papa, what do I do?" Papa did not answer. The candle burned down. She slept on the floor of her father's room, because the bed felt too big to be in alone. In the morning, she packed the wooden bird into her trunk, and she did not write back to Bartholomew Vaughn. Not yet. She gave herself 10 more days. Just 10. 10 days for Caleb Hawthorne, whoever he was, to write. The letter from Caleb Hawthorne did not come. But on the 7th day, another letter from Vaughn did. This one was shorter. Miss Bell, I have not received the courtesy of your reply. I trust this is owing to the Postal Service and not to any lack of interest on your part. I have purchased a ticket in your name on the Union Pacific departing Boston on the morning of October the 2nd. I will meet you personally at the depot in Silver Hollow. Vaughn. He had bought the ticket already. He had bought it without her permission. He had decided. Eleanor stood in the hallway of the apartment that no longer belonged to her, holding a ticket she had not asked for in her stocking feet. Hair still wet, and she felt something in her chest that she had never felt before. Not fear, something colder than fear, something that paid attention. A man who buys a ticket for a woman before she has answered him. That is not a man asking, that is a man taking. And a man who takes by mail is a man who will take by hand once the train arrives. She thought about that for a long time. She thought about the $80. She thought about the $4,200 her father had supposedly owed a man he had never met. She thought about the pencil writing on the back of the first letter. Caleb Hawthorne. He owes me one. He will know what to do. And she made a decision. She would get on that train. But not because Bartholomew Vaughn told her to. She would get on that train because Silver Hollow was where the answers were. And answers were the only thing she had left worth chasing. She left Boston on the morning of October the 2nd, 1882. She wore her mother's gray traveling dress, her father's gold pocket watch in her chest pocket against her heart, the wooden finch in her glove, and in the false bottom of her trunk, wrapped in oilcloth, the 2 letters from Vaughn and the 1 pencil note from her father. She did not have a return ticket. She did not have a plan. She had $13 left from the candlesticks, the 80 from Vaughn, and the small heat of a question she could not let go. What did Bartholomew Vaughn want from a Boston piano teacher's daughter badly enough to buy her a train ticket before she answered? The train moved west for 6 days, through Albany, through Buffalo, past lakes the color of slate, past forests turning red and gold, past cornfields stretching flat and dead to the horizon, past prairie towns with single streets and wooden churches, in stockyards smelling of cattle and dust. She read her Bible. She read her father's annotated copy of Walden. She wrote 3 letters to her dead father that she never sent. She listened to a Methodist preacher across the aisle argue with a Mormon farmer about the soul. She drank tea so weak it was hot water with a suggestion of color. And she watched the country change. Hills became mountains. The mountains had no end. On the morning of the 7th day, the conductor walked through the car and called out Silver Hollow, Colorado Territory, Silver Hollow. Next stop. Eleanor put on her bonnet. She did not put on her gloves because her hands were sweating. And gloves on sweating hands stick. The train slowed. The platform appeared. A small wooden building with a peeling green sign, a dusty street running away from it. Mountains rising up behind, so close they seemed to lean over the town. A small crowd waited, and one man stood ahead of the crowd. She knew him before the train stopped, because he was waiting like a man who owned the platform. Bartholomew Vaughn was 48 years old, heavy-set, a pale ring of beard around a soft pink chin, a black wool coat too warm for the morning, a gold watch chain across his belly, a signet ring on his left smallest finger, and smiling the way a man smiles when his package has arrived. Eleanor stepped down from the train. Vaughn walked forward. "Miss Bell," he said it slow, the way a man says a thing he has practiced. "Welcome," Eleanor said, "Mr. Vaughn." He took her hand, without asking. She let him. Because $13 does not get you back to Boston. "You must be weary," he said. "The carriage is just here." "I am," Eleanor said. He smiled wider. Behind him across the dirt street, 3 men stood under the awning of a feed store. Eleanor did not mean to look. She meant to follow Vaughn to his carriage and not see them at all. But she looked, and the tallest of them was looking at her. 3 men, all in long oilcloth dusters the color of wet earth. The tallest stood in the center, maybe 6'3", A dark beard cut close, a scar that ran from his right temple down past the corner of his eye to his cheekbone. The kind of scar a knife makes not a fall. He held a brown felt hat against his chest. His hair was dark and gray at the temples. He was not young. He was not old. He was somewhere in the long middle of a man's life where the work has already shown on him. He was looking at her the way a hunter looks at a creature that has just stepped into his field of view. Not predatory, just attentive. The way you look at something when you are deciding what kind of thing it is. He was not smiling. Eleanor felt the look land. She felt it like a hand on her shoulder. She turned her face away, toward Vaughn, toward the carriage, toward the path her ticket had bought her. Vaughn was talking. Vaughn was always talking. But Eleanor, in the back of her mind, in the part of her that had spent 6 days on a train watching the country change, made a quiet note. 3 men. The center one had a scar. He had looked at her like he knew something she did not. That was at 9:20 in the morning on the 2nd of October, 1882. And the man with the scar was Caleb Hawthorne. But Eleanor Bell did not know that yet. She would not know it for 2 more days. 2 days that would change everything. The carriage rolled through Silver Hollow. It was not a town. It was a wound that had grown a town around it. A single muddy street, a bank, a general store, a church, a saloon called the Iron Bell, a livery, a telegraph office. Behind those, a scatter of houses, some painted, most not, and rising behind everything the mountains. Vaughn pointed things out. That is my bank. That is the church I have funded for 10 years. That is the school I founded. That is my mercantile. My. Eleanor counted 12 of them before they reached the house. The house sat at the edge of town on its own small hill. White paint, a wide porch, 2 stories, green shutters, a picket fence that someone whitewashed last summer and not since. A woman stood on the porch. She wore mourning gray, though her hair was pinned in the latest Boston style, a pearl pin at her throat. Her face had been beautiful once. It still was in the way a knife is beautiful, sharp and made for cutting. Vaughn said, "Miss Bell, may I present Mrs. Adelaide Crane, the widow of our former mayor, a dear friend of the family." Mrs. Crane said, "Welcome to Silver Hollow, Miss Bell." Eleanor said, "Thank you." Mrs. Crane looked at her dress. Mrs. Crane looked at her boots. Mrs. Crane looked at the lump in her glove where the wooden finch sat against her palm. Mrs. Crane smiled. "You poor dear," she said. "You must be exhausted." Eleanor said, "A little." Mrs. Crane said, "We shall have you cleaned up by supper." Adelaide Crane was 47 years old. She had come to Silver Hollow from Boston 27 years before as a bride of 20. She had been the most envied woman in the territory once. And then her husband, Mayor Crane, had died 8 years ago of a wagon accident that was not an accident, and Adelaide Crane had quietly become the kind of woman who knows how a man's coat fits before he does. She had not married Bartholomew Vaughn, but she had not left his house in 5 years either. She had also, 27 years ago, been a Boston piano teacher's daughter who answered a letter from a Colorado banker. She did not see this in Eleanor Bell yet. She would. That evening, Eleanor sat at a long mahogany table eating roast chicken. She did not taste listening to Vaughn talk about himself, and she watched Adelaide Crane watch her. Mrs. Crane watched her the way a woman watches a younger woman who has just walked into the kitchen where she has been the only woman for a very long time. When the soup was cleared, Mrs. Crane said lightly, "Tell us about your father, dear." Eleanor said, "He was a music teacher." Mrs. Crane said, "And your mother?" "She passed when I was 9. A pity." "Yes, and no siblings." "No, and no other family." Eleanor set her fork down. "No," she said, "not living." Mrs. Crane smiled. "Well," she said, "you have us now." Vaughn lifted his wineglass. "To Miss Bell," he said, "may her time in Silver Hollow be the beginning of every good thing." They drank. Eleanor did not. After supper, the housekeeper, a thin woman with a bun and frightened eyes who did not give her name, led Eleanor upstairs to a guest room at the end of the hall. The room had a four-poster bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, a window that looked out onto the back garden, a lock on the inside of the door. Eleanor noted the lock. She slid it home before she even took off her bonnet. She stood at the window for a long time. The sun was setting behind the mountains. The mountains were turning purple, then black. She thought about her father. She thought about the piano in the parlor in Boston, which was now sold and gone. She thought about Caleb Hawthorne, whoever he was who had not written. She thought about the tall man across the street with the scar. She turned to go to the washstand. And there on the pillow of her bed, where it had not been when she came in, was a folded piece of paper. She picked it up. She unfolded it. The writing was thick and slanted, pressed deep into the paper. The kind of writing a man does when he wants you to feel his weight from 1,000 miles away. But this was not Vaughn's hand. It said in pencil in 3 lines, "Do not marry him. He is not what he says. Wait for me. I am coming." C.H. Eleanor read it once. She read it twice. She read it 3 times. And then she sat down on the edge of the bed in a dress that did not belong here, in a town she had not chosen, in a country she did not understand, holding a note from a man she had never met, but whose name her dead father had written in pencil on the back of a letter from a liar. She did not know how it had gotten onto her pillow. She did not know who had brought it in. She did not know whether Caleb Hawthorne was friend or another kind of trouble. But she knew one thing: she was not alone. Someone else in Silver Hollow knew that Bartholomew Vaughn was lying, and that someone had reached her first. She slid the note into her stocking against her ankle. She blew out the lamp. She lay down on top of the quilt in her traveling dress, and she did not sleep. She listened. She listened to the house, the creak of floorboards downstairs, the low murmur of Vaughn's voice and Mrs. Crane's voice in some rooms she could not see, the slow, soft tick of a clock on the mantel below, a horse on the street outside walking past, then stopping, then walking on. She listened until the house went quiet, until the mountains outside her window were only a darker black than the sky. And then somewhere out in that darkness, somewhere among the pines, she thought she heard a single owl call, twice, and go still. She did not know yet that the owl was a man, or that the man was already moving. In the morning, Vaughn announced the wedding. He did it at breakfast, casually, as if mentioning the weather. "I have spoken with Reverend Pike. The ceremony shall be Friday morning at 10 o'clock. A small affair, only the leading families. Adelaide has been so good as to assist with your dress." Eleanor set her teacup down. "Friday," she said. "3 days hence," said Vaughn. "I have not agreed to a date." Vaughn smiled. "My dear, the arrangement has been settled. Your father and I corresponded on the matter at length." Eleanor said, "May I see those letters?" Vaughn paused, only for a heartbeat. Then he smiled again. "They are at the bank, locked in the vault for safekeeping. I will bring them when I bring the marriage papers." Mrs. Crane said sweetly, "Miss Bell, the girl is shy, Bartholomew." "Of course she is. A new town, a new home. Friday is too soon. Give her until Sunday." Vaughn looked at Mrs. Crane. Adelaide held his gaze. "Sunday," said Vaughn at last. "Sunday, then. Reverend Pike will be informed." He returned to his ham. Eleanor felt Mrs. Crane's eyes on her across the table. Mrs. Crane was not helping her. Mrs. Crane had bought her 2 days. The way a butcher buys 2 days for a calf. But 2 days was 2 days. 2 days for Caleb Hawthorne to come. 2 days for Eleanor to find the letters Vaughn was hiding. 2 days for her to figure out what kind of cage she had stepped into. After breakfast, Mrs. Crane took her to be measured for a wedding dress. The seamstress was a small Welsh woman named Mrs. Bryn, who did not speak when Mrs. Crane was in the room. While Mrs. Bryn was kneeling at Eleanor's hem with pins in her mouth, Mrs. Crane stood at the window of the shop and said very softly without turning, You are not the first, you know. Eleanor said, I beg your pardon. Mrs. Crane said, he has bought a ticket for a Boston girl before. Eleanor did not move. Mrs. Bryn's hands paused on the hem. Mrs. Crane said 3 years ago, a girl named Margaret. She came on a Tuesday. She was gone by Sunday. Gone where? Mrs. Crane turned from the window. Her face was very calm. Gone, she said. Eleanor said, Mrs. Crane, why are you telling me this? Mrs. Crane studied her. Because she said, I would like to see what kind of girl my Bartholomew has brought me this time. She left the shop. Mrs. Bryn pressed a folded square of paper into Eleanor's hand under the hem of the skirt and whispered, There is a back door through the alley. The Hawthorne brothers ride in on Wednesdays. Tomorrow. Find a way. Eleanor closed her fingers around the paper. That was how Eleanor learned on a Tuesday morning in October of 1882 that the man who would come down out of the mountains the next day was named Caleb Hawthorne, that he was one of 3 brothers, that he was a man. Some people in town thought worth risking themselves to send a stranger toward, and that she was not the first Boston girl to arrive at Bartholomew Vaughan's house. She was only the first one with a name to call. That night she did not sleep at all. She sat in the 4-poster bed with the wooden finch in her lap and the pencil note from CH against her ankle, and the seamstress's folded slip of paper in her stocking on the other ankle, and she waited for the dawn. When the dawn came, it came gray and slow over the mountains. And Eleanor Bell, 22 years old, daughter of a dead piano teacher in Boston, alone in the upstairs room of a man who had bought her train ticket and was buying her wedding dress, made the second decision of her life. The first had been to get on the train. The second was that she would one way or another get to the brothers from the mountain before Sunday. Because if Bartholomew Vaughan had buried a Boston girl named Margaret 3 years ago, then Bartholomew Vaughan had killed her father. She did not know it yet for certain, but her body knew it. The same way it had known in the parlor that the piano had not stopped because her father had finished. Some things you do not need proof of. You only need to stop pretending you do not see them. She put the finch into her chest pocket. She put the 2 notes back into her stockings. She stood up. She went to the window and she looked out at the long, muddy street of Silver Hollow and the mountains rising behind it, and she said softly to no one in the same voice she had used the night her father died, Papa, I am still here. And somewhere out beyond the pines, 3 men were saddling their horses to ride into town. The youngest of them, a man named Silas, was tightening his cinch in the gray light, his breath making clouds in the cold air. The middle one, Wyatt, was checking the bandages he kept in his saddlebag, the way a man checks them when he expects trouble. The eldest, Caleb, was standing on the porch of a log house at the edge of a high pine clearing, looking down at the valley where Silver Hollow sat in its morning fog, and he was thinking. 2 years he had been hunting Bartholomew Vaughan. 2 years he had been collecting pieces of paper and pieces of testimony and pieces of stories no one in Silver Hollow would say above a whisper. He had bait in town now. He had set the bait himself. He had not expected the bait to be a real woman, but she was real. He had seen her at the depot. He had seen Vaughan's hand on her arm. He had seen the way she had not flinched, but the way she had not leaned in either. She was a Boston piano teacher's daughter, and she was 22 years old, and her father had been a man named Thaddeus Bell, who had once carried Caleb half a mile across a cornfield at Antietam with a hole the size of a fist in his side, and who had written Caleb a letter in June that Caleb had not answered fast enough. Thaddeus Bell was dead now. His daughter was in Vaughan's house. And Caleb Hawthorne had been a man who for 20 years had managed not to owe anyone anything that he could not pay. This one he could not pay. He could only ride down into town and try. He put on his coat. He picked up his rifle. He walked down the porch steps. He swung up into the saddle. And the 3 Hawthorne brothers turned their horses east toward the long ridge above Silver Hollow, where the trail came down out of the pines and the town first became visible. It was Wednesday morning, the 4th of October, 1882. In 4 days, Bartholomew Vaughan intended to marry Eleanor Bell. In 3 days, Caleb Hawthorne intended to stop him. But before either of those things happened on this gray Wednesday morning, Eleanor Bell was already dressing herself in front of the wardrobe mirror in her four-poster bed, was already sliding the wooden finch into her glove, was already deciding that she was going to go down to that shop and find a back door through an alley. And Adelaide Crane, the widow of the mayor who was not killed by a wagon accident, was sitting in her own bedroom at the other end of the hall, looking at a daguerreotype of a young Boston girl she had been once, and thinking, "The young ones come and they go. I wonder if this one is going to go, or if this one is going to stay." Because some of us, Adelaide Crane, thought do not go. Some of us learn how to live inside the cage. And some of us, she thought, looking at the picture of herself at 20. Some of us learn how to pick the lock. She put the picture face down on her dresser. She rose. She went to find Eleanor. The cage she had decided sometime in the long night was going to open one way or another. She just did not yet know which side of it she was going to be standing on when it did. Outside on the long road that led down into Silver Hollow from the high pines, 3 horses came at an easy walk. And Eleanor Bell, downstairs in the front hall of Bartholomew Vaughan's house, was tying the ribbon of her bonnet under her chin and saying to the housekeeper in a voice that did not shake, "I should very much like to walk into town this morning. Just to look at the shops. I shall not be long." The housekeeper, eyes lowered, said, "Yes, miss." Eleanor opened the door. She stepped down onto the porch. The morning air smelled of pine and wood smoke and cold stone. She put one foot, then the other, onto the path that led toward the town. And somewhere on the ridge above her, a man with a scar from temple to cheekbone touched his hat brim against the wind and rode on. The path into town was longer than it looked. Eleanor kept her head down, not because she was afraid, because she did not want anyone to see her face. Because a woman walking alone down a single muddy street in a town that did not belong to her was already a thing people would notice. And a Boston dress in Colorado mud was a flag. She walked past the church. She walked past the bank with Vaughan's name on the door. She walked past the saloon called the Iron Bell, which was already open at 9 in the morning. 2 men leaning against the rail outside with bottles in their hands and eyes that followed her without moving their heads. She did not look back, because looking back is what scared women do, and scared women get hurt. She reached the seamstress's shop. Mrs. Bryn was inside, bent over a sewing machine. The shop was empty. The bell over the door jingled once and Mrs. Bryn's head came up sharp. Eleanor said, "Good morning." Mrs. Bryn said, "You came alone." She did. Vaughan's housekeeper knows I am here. I told her shopping. She will not say. Mrs. Bryn nodded once. "The back door," she said. "The alley, then left. Then the second cross street, then the livery. They will be there by now." Eleanor said, "Mrs. Bryn, why are you helping me?" "Because Mrs. Bryn said." Her hands did not stop sewing. "My sister was Margaret." Eleanor felt the floor of the shop tilt. Mrs. Bryn looked up. Her eyes were wet. Her hands kept sewing. "Go," she said, "now, before he sends Adelaide after you." Eleanor went. Through the back door, into an alley that smelled of horse manure and pine. Left. Then the second cross street. Then the livery. The livery was a long, low building with a wide open door. Inside 4 horses. 3 of them tall and powerful, dark with sweat from a long ride. One of them small, a chestnut mare with a gentle eye. And 3 men. The youngest was checking a hoof. He was maybe 30, red hair under his hat, a freckled face that did not look like a man who would hurt anybody. Until you saw his hands. His hands were knuckled and scarred, and they held the hoof pick the way another man would hold a knife. The middle one was checking the cinch on the second horse. He was the broadest. Brown beard, eyes that watched everything but stayed quiet about what they saw. A small leather satchel hung from his saddle, the kind that holds medicine. And the third one was standing alone in the shadow at the back of the livery. He was not doing anything. He was watching the door. The third one had a scar from temple to cheekbone. He saw her before she saw him. He had already seen her, of course, from the ridge, from the depot the day before, from the moment she walked out of Vaughn's house in her bonnet and turned toward town instead of away from it. He had already known she would come. Eleanor stopped in the doorway. "Caleb Hawthorne," she said. The youngest one's head came up sharp. The middle one's hand paused on the cinch. The third one, the one in the shadow, did not move. "I am," he said. Eleanor swallowed. Her mouth was dry. "I am Eleanor Bell," she said. He stepped out of the shadow. He was taller than she had thought from the platform. He had taken his hat off. His hair was dark and gray at the temples. The scar was paler now in the morning light, the kind that had healed badly because no one had stitched it in time. He looked at her for a long second. Then he said, "You came on the train Monday." "Yes." "You walked here alone." "Yes. Vaughn knows. He thinks I am shopping." A small sound came from the middle brother. Not a laugh. Something closer to an exhale of pain. The eldest said, "Miss Bell, we have not got long. Vaughn's widow walks past this livery on Wednesdays. She will be along by the half hour. You need to say what you came to say, and then you need to go." Eleanor said, "My father wrote your name, in pencil, on the back of a letter from Vaughn." The eldest did not move, but something in his face went still in a different way than it had been still before. The way a creek goes still when ice closes over the top of it. "Your father," he said, "Thaddeus Bell." The silence in the livery was so complete that Eleanor could hear the chestnut mare chewing her hay. The middle brother said very softly, "Caleb." The eldest Caleb said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Your father is dead." It was not a question. She said yes. He said, "When?" "August 20th. "How?" "The doctor said pneumonia." Caleb closed his eyes, only for a second. When he opened them, his face had not changed, but the air around him had. Eleanor felt it, the way a room changes when a man decides something he is not going to take back. The youngest one, the redhead, took a half step forward. Caleb said, "Silas, stand down." "I am. Stand down." Silas stopped. Caleb said to Eleanor, "You have the letter." She slid her hand into her sleeve and brought out the folded paper from Boston. The first one. The one with the $4,200. The one with her father's pencil writing on the back. She held it out. Caleb did not take it from her hand. He stepped close, closer than he had been, close enough that she could smell him. Pine and cold air and the leather of a man who had been on a horse since before dawn. He read it without touching it. He read both sides. He read it twice. He stepped back. He said, "Miss Bell, I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer me plain." "All right. Did Vaughn send you the $80 in a separate letter?" "Yes. And did he say in that letter that your father had written to him about marrying you?" "Yes. He did not write to Vaughn about marrying you." "I know that. How do you know that?" Eleanor said, "Because my father did not lie. Not in his life, not on his deathbed, not in his letters. He did not write to a Colorado banker about selling his daughter. He wrote to you. He wrote you owed him." Caleb said he did. He said it without expression. "He owed me my life." Eleanor felt something break in her chest. Not loudly, the way a teacup breaks when it has been cracked for a long time and finally gives up. She did not cry. She did not have time to cry. She said Friday. He moved the wedding to Friday. Mrs. Crane moved it to Sunday. "I have until Sunday." Caleb said, "You have until I say." He turned to the middle brother. "Wyatt." The middle brother said, "Yes. Ride. The pass. Now. Wire Denver from Salida. Find Marshall Kane wherever he is. Tell him to ride west on the first horse he can find. Tell him the bell letter is real. Tell him bring 2 deputies. Tell him I am calling in the favor from 81. Wyatt was already moving. He swung up into his saddle. He did not waste a word. He kicked his horse forward and was out the back of the livery and gone before Eleanor finished blinking. Caleb turned to Silas. Silas, stay in town. The iron bell. Watch the back door of Vaughn's house. Anything moves toward the depot you ride. Anything moves toward the church you ride. Anything Adelaide Crane does, you note it. You do not engage. You do not fire. You watch. Silas said, yes. And he was gone too, out the front, already pulling his hat low. Caleb and Eleanor were alone in the livery with 2 horses. He looked at her. Miss Bell, yes, I am going to take you to my mountain. She said nothing. He said, you can say no. You can walk back to Vaughn's house right now. I will not stop you. But if you do, I cannot promise you live to see Sunday. I am being plain with you because you came in here being plain with me, and I owe you that. She said, how long is the ride? 3 hours up the mountain. I have nothing with me. We have a woman at the house. Her name is Martha. She will lend you what you need. I have not packed my trunk. Your trunk will come tomorrow. Wyatt's wife will see to it before she leaves town. Wyatt has a wife. Wyatt has Mrs. Bryn. Eleanor said, oh. She had not expected that. She also did not have time to be surprised. But Caleb saw the question on her face, and he gave her the short answer. Mrs. Bryn had married Wyatt in the spring of '80, a year after her sister Margaret died in Vaughn's house. She had come up the mountain on foot one night with nothing but a sewing kit and a story about a bruise on a throat that did not come from a stair. Wyatt had married her quietly. They had no children. They had the sewing shop in town that was also Wyatt's listening post. The town did not know they were married. That was on purpose. She said, I will come. He said, get on the chestnut. She did. He led both horses out the back of the livery. He looked left. He looked right. He said, now. He swung up onto his own horse. He clicked his tongue, and the 2 of them rode out the back of Silver Hollow at a brisk walk that became a trot once they were past the houses and a canter once they were on the trail that led up toward the high pines. It was 9:40 in the morning on the 4th of October, 1882, and Eleanor Bell Boston, piano teacher's daughter, was riding up a mountain behind a man named Caleb Hawthorne, away from the wedding her father had not arranged toward a house she had never seen. She did not look back. She rode. The trail climbed. The pines closed in. The horse's breath made clouds. Caleb did not speak. He rode a length ahead of her, his rifle laid across his lap, his eyes moving constantly. Left, right, up the slope, down the slope, back along the trail behind them. He rode like a man who had ridden every mile of this mountain 1,000 times and still did not trust it. After an hour, they came out of the pines into a high clearing. The clearing held 3 buildings. A long log house with a stone chimney smoking gently. A barn. A small cabin set apart at the edge of the trees. A creek ran along the side of the clearing. The mountain rose behind everything, blue and far away. A woman came out onto the porch of the long house. She was 64 years old. Her hair was iron gray. She wore an apron over a wool dress. She held a wooden spoon in her hand the way another woman might hold a Bible. Her name was Martha Doyle. She had buried 2 children and a husband and had raised the 3 Hawthorne brothers from when Silas was 9. She looked at Eleanor. She looked at Caleb. She said, tell me you did not do something stupid. Caleb said, I did not. Martha said, get the girl down off that horse before she falls off, and bring her into my kitchen, and you and me are going to have a talk. She turned around. She went back inside. Caleb swung down. He came to Eleanor's side. He lifted his hands. He did not touch her. He waited. Eleanor put her hands on his shoulders. He set his hands at her waist. He lifted her down. He stepped back the moment her feet touched the ground. That was the first time a man had touched her since her father had stopped playing the piano in August. It lasted 2 seconds. It was the most careful 2 seconds of Eleanor's life. He led her into the kitchen. The kitchen smelled of bread and onions and wood smoke. It smelled like a house, a real house, a house someone lived in, not a house someone displayed. Eleanor had not realized until that moment that Vaughn's house did not smell of anything at all. Martha put a bowl of stew in front of her without asking. She put a piece of bread next to it. She put a cup of black coffee next to that. She said, "Eat." Eleanor said, "I am not." "Eat," said Martha. And she stood there with the spoon until Eleanor picked up the other one and put it in her mouth. The stew was hot and salty and good. Eleanor had not eaten anything in 2 days that she had tasted. She started crying into the stew without meaning to. She did not sob. She did not make a sound. The tears just rolled down her face and into the bowl, and she kept eating because Martha was watching her, and Martha had said eat. Martha did not say it is all right. Martha did not say poor child. Martha turned to Caleb and she said, "You go in your office. You leave the door open. You let me feed her." Caleb went. He left the door open. Martha sat down across from Eleanor. She said, "Eat slow. You will be sick if you eat fast." Eleanor ate slow. When the bowl was empty, Martha refilled it. When that bowl was empty, Martha said, "Now you tell me." Eleanor told her. She told her about her father at the piano, about the bowl of apple slices, about the 2 letters from Vaughn, about the $80, about the train, about the platform, about Adelaide, about Mrs. Bryn, about Margaret. The crying had stopped when the stew started. Martha listened with her hands flat on the table. When Eleanor was done, Martha said, "You ride well for a Boston girl." "I am not Boston," Eleanor said. "I am Massachusetts." "There is a difference." Martha smiled, just a corner of her mouth. She said, "Stay here. I will speak with Caleb. Then I will show you where you sleep." Eleanor stayed. She heard their voices through the open office door. She did not catch the words. She caught the shape of them. Martha was angry. Caleb was not arguing. Martha said something that ended sharp. Caleb said something that ended quiet. There was a silence. Then Martha came back out and said, "Come." She took Eleanor upstairs, second floor, east side, end of the hall. The room had a 4-poster bed and a window that faced the mountain, a small writing desk, a wardrobe, a washstand, a rag rug on the floor, a bolt on the inside of the door. Eleanor noticed the bolt. Martha noticed her noticing. "I put that there myself," Martha said, "yesterday afternoon, when Caleb told me a girl might be coming." Eleanor said, "Thank you." Martha said, "You wash, you sleep. Supper at 6. She left. Eleanor stood in the middle of the room. She slid the bolt closed. She heard it click. She sat down on the edge of the bed. And she did not for a moment know what to do with her hands. She had been doing things with her hands without stopping since August. Selling, packing, walking, writing, holding her bonnet ribbon, holding her father's ring, holding the wooden finch. Her hands had nothing to do now. Her hands began to shake. She put them in her lap. She made them stop. She thought Papa. She did not say it out loud, but her chest said it. "Papa, I have done what you said." Outside her window, the pines moved a little in the wind. A jay called somewhere in the trees. The mountain was very far away and very close all at once. She lay back on the quilt. She did not mean to sleep. She slept. She slept for 4 hours. When she woke up, the light in the room was gold. The light of a Colorado afternoon late in autumn. The kind of light that looks like honey poured slowly across the floorboards. She did not move at first. She listened. There were voices in the kitchen below. Caleb's voice. Low, measured. Another voice she did not recognize. Older. A man, then Martha's voice, then a fourth voice. Young, a boy maybe, or a young man. She got up. She smoothed her dress. She unbolted the door. She went downstairs. In the kitchen were Caleb, Martha, and two strangers. The older man was thin and white-haired. He wore a black coat. He held a leather satchel. He had the eyes of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything 30 years ago. The younger man was maybe 17. Dark hair, a long, thin face. He had been crying. Caleb stood up when Eleanor came in. He said, "Miss Bell, this is Reverend Pike." Eleanor felt her stomach turn cold. "Pike," she said. "The Reverend Pike, the one Vaughn engaged for Sunday." The Reverend said yes. "Miss," she did not know what to do. The Reverend said, "I am not here to marry you to him. I am here to tell what I know." She sat down. Martha put another cup of coffee in front of her. The Reverend said, "3 years ago, I married a young woman to Bartholomew Vaughn. Her name was Margaret. She was 20. She came from Boston. The next Sunday, I buried her. Vaughn told me she had fallen down the stairs of his house. I asked no questions. There was a bruise on her throat that had not come from a stair. I asked no questions. I am asking myself those questions now." Eleanor said, "Why?" "Because," said the Reverend Pike, "my grandson here." He put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "His name is Aaron," the Reverend said. "He worked the kitchen at the Vaughn house from the age of 14. He worked there until last Sunday. Last Sunday, he heard Vaughn tell Mrs. Crane that the Boston piano teacher's daughter was on her way and that this one would not need to fall down any stairs because this one would be married legally and would have signed her assets over to the bank before any unfortunate accident. Aaron came to me the same night. Aaron looked at the floor. Aaron said, "I should have come sooner. I should have come for Margaret." He did not look up. The Reverend said to Eleanor, "Miss Bell, you are sitting in the only house in 20 miles where Bartholomew Vaughn does not have a hand. You have an ally in me for what little I am worth. I have brought what evidence Aaron took with him. 3 years late, but I have brought it." He set a small bundle of letters on the table. Eleanor stared at the letters. She did not pick them up yet. She said, "Reverend." "Yes, there are others." The Reverend lowered his eyes. "Yes," he said, "I believe there are others. How many? I do not know." Caleb said 7. Everyone in the kitchen looked at him. Caleb said, "In 2 years I have found 7 names, 7 women and men, all with debts no one can remember them taking, all dead by misadventure, all with property that ended in the bank." Martha said, "Caleb." He looked at her. She said, "You did not tell me there were 7. He said, "I am telling you now." She put down her wooden spoon. The Reverend said, "May the Lord help us all." Eleanor put her hands flat on the table to steady them. She looked at Caleb. She said, "Why have you not done anything about it yet?" He said, "Because until 3 days ago, I had no living witness. I had names. I had patterns. I had no one alive to swear to a court. Margaret's sister, Mrs. Bryn, would not speak. Aaron would not speak. The Reverend would not speak. They were afraid. They were right to be afraid. What changed? You did." She felt her face heat. You walked into my livery and you said your father wrote my name. You named yourself out loud. Your father saved my life. He wrote to me in June. I did not answer fast enough. He is dead. You are alive. And as long as you are alive and standing in a courtroom in Denver in front of Marshall Kane, the 7 before you stop being patterns and start being murders. Eleanor said, "You used me." He looked at her. He said no. She said, "You posted a notice for a mail order bride. You did not want a bride. You wanted to see whether Vaughn would intercept it. You wanted bait." "I did," he said. "But Vaughn intercepted the letter going the other way too. He wrote to you in my name and in his own. He brought you here whether I willed it or not. And the moment your boots hit that platform on Monday, you stopped being bait. You became a woman in my care. I will keep you alive whether you ever speak in a courtroom or not. That is between you and your conscience. The rest of it is between him and mine. The kitchen was very quiet. The light through the window had gone from gold to amber. Martha said, "Eat, the lot of you. We will eat, and then we will think." She set bread on the table. She set butter. She set a pot of stew. The Reverend and Aaron stayed for supper. They did not say much. Aaron ate 3 bowls. Boys who have been scared eat that way. After supper, the Reverend and Aaron rode down the mountain. They had a candle and a lantern. The Reverend looked older going back than he had coming up. Martha went to her room. The kitchen emptied out. Caleb sat on one side of the long oak table. Eleanor sat on the other. The fire popped in the stove. Caleb said, "Miss Bell." "Yes, I owe you the truth I held back this morning." "Go on." "When I posted the notice for a wife, I posted it under a name. I posted it as Caleb Hawthorne of Silver Hollow, Colorado. Vaughn intercepted the letters that came back to me. He found yours, your handwriting, your seal. He wrote you back from himself in his own name. He kept your application. He made you a Vaughn correspondence, not mine. I never saw your handwriting until this morning." She nodded slowly. "But he said before I posted the notice, I asked one man for permission. I asked one man whether he had a daughter of marrying age and whether he would mind if I cast a wide net and let her see the notice. Because I wanted her to see it. Because I trusted that man more than any man living. I wrote him that letter in May." Eleanor said, "You wrote to my father." "I did." Her hands went cold. She said, "And he answered." "He answered," said Caleb. "In June, he said, 'Caleb, I am old. My health is failing me. My daughter is 22. She has no one. If anything happens to me, she will be alone in Boston with $13 to her name. If she should one day write to a man named Caleb Hawthorne in Colorado Territory, please understand that she is not bait. She is my whole world. I would rather she came to you than that she came to nothing. I would rather her safe with a stranger I trust than ruined with the strangers I do not." Eleanor put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She had cried that day already. She just put her face in her hands. Caleb said very quietly, "Vaughn killed your father because your father wrote to me. Because Vaughn was watching the post. Because your father's pencil note on the back of Vaughn's second letter was the same hand that had written to me in June. Vaughn put it together. He went to Boston in August. He paid the doctor $20 to write pneumonia on the certificate." Eleanor said, "How do you know that?" Caleb said, "Because the Reverend Pike has Aaron's notebook from the kitchen." She did not understand. He said Aaron worked the kitchen. Aaron heard everything. Aaron wrote it down. Vaughn was in Boston the second week of August. He came back on the train on the 17th. Your father stopped playing his nocturne on the 20th. Eleanor took her face out of her hands. She looked at him across the long oak table. She said, "I am going to need a moment." He said, "Take it." She took it. She took it for what felt like an hour, but might have been 6 minutes. The fire popped in the stove. The wind moved against the side of the house. She thought about her father at the piano. She thought about the apple slices. She thought about the $80. She thought about Vaughn's smile at the platform. She thought about Margaret. She thought about Mrs. Bryn's hands not stopping the sewing. She thought about Aaron, who was 17 and who had eaten 3 bowls of stew. She thought about 7. She thought, I am 22 years old. She thought, I am going to be 23 in February. She thought, if I do not testify in Denver, 6 more people I have not met will die. She lifted her head. She said, Caleb. He looked at her. It was the first time she had said his Christian name. She said, I will testify. He let out a breath he had clearly been holding for a long time. He said, thank you. She said, on one condition. He said, name it. She said, I am not bait anymore. I am not a debt being paid. I am not the daughter of the man you owed your life to. I am Eleanor Bell, and from this hour forward, anything that happens between us, you will say to my face. No half-truths, no protections, no deciding what I can hear and what I cannot. You will treat me as a grown woman." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "Miss Bell." She said, "Eleanor." He said, "Eleanor, I have not treated a woman that way since my wife died 8 years ago." She said, "Then start tonight." He said, "All right." He stood up from the table. He walked to the stove and he banked the coals for the night. He turned at the doorway. He said, "There is one more thing I have not told you. It can wait until morning if you would rather." She said, "Now." He said, "My sister Sarah disappeared in 1874. We buried an empty coffin. We have grieved her for 8 years. Today, before Wyatt rode to Denver, I asked him also to send a wire to Sacramento, because Aaron's notebook has one more name in it I did not mention. Sarah Hawthorne, Sacramento, still living." The note in Vaughn's hand. 8 years. He has known where my sister was for 8 years. He has used that information to keep me quiet about lesser things. I have been quiet for 2 years because of it, until your father wrote me in June, until I stopped being quiet. Eleanor's lips parted. She said, "You did all of this. The notice, the bait, the watch on the post, knowing he was holding your sister over your head." He said, "Yes." She said, "Caleb." He said, "Yes." She said, "We are going to take him down." He said, "We are." "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Caleb." He left. She heard his boots on the stairs, slow, tired. The boots of a man who had been carrying 8 years of weight and had finally in a kitchen in front of a woman from Boston who had ridden a chestnut mare up his mountain set some of it down. She sat at the long oak table a while longer. The fire ticked in the stove. The wind moved. The mountain held the house in its lap. She took the wooden finch out of her pocket. She set it on the table in front of her. She said to the finch in a very small voice, "Papa, we are not done yet." The finch did not answer. The finch never had. But Eleanor Bell, 22 years old daughter of Thaddeus, sitting in a kitchen 7,000 feet above the lying town of Silver Hollow, was beginning for the first time since August to feel the small heat in her chest as something other than grief. She was beginning to feel it as a question with an answer. The answer was simple. The answer was no. No to Bartholomew Vaughn. No to the wedding on Sunday. No to going quietly. No to being the 8th name in a notebook. No. It was the strongest word she had ever spoken in her life. She had not even said it out loud yet. She would. She picked up the finch. She slid it back into the pocket above her heart. She went up the stairs. She bolted her door. She slept like a woman who had finally, after a long time, picked a fight worth being in. Down in the valley, 11 miles below her in his white house, on the small hill, Bartholomew Vaughn was sitting in his study with a glass of brandy and a telegram in his hand. The telegram had come at 4 o'clock from his man at the Silver Hollow Post. The telegram said, "Bride gone, seamstress shop, back door, Hawthorne livery, up mountain, confirmed." Vaughn folded the telegram once. He folded it twice. He set it on the desk. He drank the brandy. He poured another. Mrs. Crane was in the doorway of the study. She had been there for a minute. He had not noticed her until he poured the second brandy. He said, "You knew she would run." Mrs. Crane said, "Did I?" He said, "You bought her 2 days. You gave her Wednesday." Mrs. Crane said, "Bartholomew." "Yes, I have given you 27 years. He said, "You have." She said, "I am not certain I have any more to give." He looked at her. For the first time in 5 years, he looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he might have miscalculated. He said, "Adelaide." She said, "Bartholomew. Be careful with this one." She turned. She went up the stairs. Vaughn sat at his desk and he held the glass of brandy and he looked at the telegram he had folded twice. He did not know yet that a federal marshal in Denver had received a different wire 2 hours earlier. He did not know that Wyatt Hawthorne was already changing horses for the night ride. He did not know that an old reverend named Pike was sitting in his vestry copying out a kitchen boy's notebook by candlelight. He did not know that his housekeeper, who had eyes like a frightened animal, was packing a small carpet bag in her attic room. He only knew that the bride had gone up the mountain, and that he had 3 days until Sunday to bring her back down. He drank the second brandy. He stood up. He walked to the window. The mountain was a black wall against a black sky. He could not see the house at the top. He could not see the woman who had once been a Boston piano teacher's daughter. He could not see the man with the scar from temple to cheekbone who had finally, after 2 years of quiet, decided to come for him. But he felt it, the way a man feels weather. He said very softly to the dark window, "So," and he turned and he went to find his hat. Thursday morning came gray. The mountain wore a thin skin of frost. Eleanor woke before the sun. She had not meant to. Her body had been a Boston body until Monday. A Boston body wakes at 7. A Boston body waits for the gas to warm. But the body that woke in the 4-poster bed on Hawthorne Ridge was something else. A body that had said no. A body that had picked a fight. A body that needed to know where the people in its corner were. She lit the lamp. She washed her face from the basin. The water was so cold it hurt her teeth. She liked it. Pain. That was honest. She put on the dress Martha had laid across the chair last night. Wool, dark blue, plain. The skirt was a little long in the hem. Eleanor turned the hem up with 2 pins from her bonnet and went downstairs. Martha was already at the stove. Coffee on, bacon in the pan, bread on the board. Martha said, "You did not sleep." Eleanor said, "I did." 4 hours. Martha said, "That is not sleep. That is a nap." Eleanor said, "In Boston, we call it a Tuesday." Martha made a sound that was almost a laugh. She set a cup of coffee in Eleanor's hand without asking. Eleanor drank. The coffee was strong enough to peel paint. She loved it. She had not loved a thing she put in her mouth since August. Caleb came in from the porch. He had a rifle on his shoulder. He had been outside since 4. The mountain was his. He walked the mountain every morning like a man who did not trust the trees to stay where he had left them. He saw Eleanor at the table. He took the rifle down off his shoulder. He stood it in the corner by the door. He said, "Morning." She said, "Morning." He said, "You slept." She said, "I slept." He said, "Good." He sat down at the table. Martha put bacon in front of him, and eggs and bread. Eleanor watched him eat for a moment. He ate like a man who had not slept, which he had not. She had heard him walk the porch all night. She said, "Caleb." He looked up. She said, "Today." He said, "Today we wait." Wait for what? Wyatt, Marshall Kane, a wire from Denver. Silas to come back with what he saw in town. Wait. She tasted the word. It tasted like Boston. She did not like it anymore. She said, "I do not wait well." He said, "I noticed." She said, "You noticed in 2 days." He said, "I noticed in 2 minutes." That was the closest thing to a joke he had said to her. She did not smile. She did file it away. She said, "Then what?" He said, "Then we move." He poured her more coffee. She noticed. She did not say so. There was no time yet. Silas came up the trail at 8. He came hard. His horse was lathered. His hat was in his hand. His face was red from cold and from riding. Eleanor was on the porch when he rode in. Caleb came out of the barn. Silas swung down. He did not waste a word. He said, "Vaughn left town at sunup." Caleb said, "Where?" I followed 2 miles. He took the south road. 3 men with him. Pack animals. He was not going to Denver. He was going to the railhead at Salida. Caleb said, "Why Salida?" Silas said, "Because?" He paused. He looked at Eleanor. He said, because that is where you ship a person if you do not want them shipped from Silver Hollow. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. She said, who? Silas said, his housekeeper. Eleanor said, his housekeeper. Silas said, the thin one, with the bun, frightened eyes, the one who never spoke. Erin's notebook had a question mark next to her name. He never figured out whether she was safe or not. She tried to leave last night with a carpet bag. Vaughn caught her at the back door. She is in the wagon. They are taking her to Salida to put her on a train east. Eleanor said, or off a bridge. Silas said, or off a bridge. She turned to Caleb. Her face was very pale and very calm. She said, we are not waiting. He said, I know. He said it without arguing. He said it the way a man says it when he has already arrived at the same conclusion. He looked at Silas. How far ahead? 7 hours. Pack mules slow him. Yes. The south road is rough through the pass. Yes. We can cut overland, cross the creek at the old crossing, pick up the south road past the pass. We could be in front of him by sundown. We could. Caleb said saddle, 2 horses, the chestnut for her, the bay for me. Silas said, and me. Caleb said, you ride down the mountain, back to town. The iron bell. You watch the telegraph office. If a wire comes from Wyatt, you bring it to us at the pass. Silas said, Caleb. Caleb said, do not argue with me. Silas did not argue. He saddled the horses. Martha came out onto the porch with a satchel. She put it in Eleanor's hands. She said, bread, salt pork, a blanket, a flask, bandages, a knife. A knife. Yes. Eleanor said, I cannot use a knife. Martha said, you will not need to use it. You will need to have it. She closed Eleanor's hand around the satchel. She said, child. Eleanor said, yes. Martha said, come home. Eleanor said, I will. It was the first time she had called any place home in 2 months. She did not stop to feel it. She had a horse to get on. She got on. The trail down the back of the mountain was not a trail. It was the memory of a trail. It went through pines so thick that the day went green and dim around them. It went over rocks the size of carriages. It went down through a narrow creek bed where the chestnut mare had to set her feet one at a time, careful as a cat. Caleb rode in front. He did not look back. He did not need to. She was right behind him. She felt that he knew exactly where she was, even when he was not looking. The way a man knows where his rifle is, even when his hands are full. They rode for 3 hours without speaking. Then she said, Caleb. He said, yes. She said, tell me about your wife. He did not answer right away. The trees moved past. A jay called somewhere. He said her name was Margaret. Eleanor's breath caught. He said, not the Boston Margaret. Mine was Welsh. Margaret Owen. She came up from the mining camp at Leadville in 73. I married her in 74. She died in 74. How? In childbed. The baby with her. A boy. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. It was 8 years ago. I am a man who has had 8 years to find a new shape. I have found one. She said, why have you not married again? He said, because I did not. She said, that is not an answer. He said, because I did not want to put another woman in that ground. Because I built a house and a ranch and a life, and I did not want to lose any of it again. She said, and now? He did not answer for a long time. The trees moved past. He said, and now I am riding through pines I have ridden 100 times. Behind me is a woman from Boston who has been on my mountain one night. I am not thinking the right thoughts. She said, what are the right thoughts? He said, about a housekeeper in a wagon, about a federal marshal, about Sunday. She said, and what are the wrong thoughts? He said, Eleanor. That was all he said. He said it once. He said it the way a man says a name when the name has become a thing he has stopped pretending he did not say to himself. She did not push him further. She did not need to. She had her answer. She rode behind him with a small, clear pain in her chest that was not grief. That was new. The pain had teeth, and the pain was hers. They crossed the creek at noon. The creek was high, cold, loud. The chestnut put her feet down one at a time, and Eleanor leaned forward and held the saddle horn the way Martha had told her, and did not look at the water. They climbed the other bank. They rested the horses for 10 minutes. Caleb watered them from his hat. He did not eat. He gave Eleanor bread and salt pork. She ate standing up. She had not since August eaten standing up the way a working person eats. She found she was a working person. She would unpack the rest of what that meant later, if there was a later. They pushed on. They came down out of the pines at 3. The south road was below them, a long pale ribbon of dust through scrub and stone. No wagon yet. Caleb said, "We are ahead. 40 minutes maybe. He will come around that bend." He pointed. She looked. The bend was half a mile away. A pile of red rock. A bare cottonwood. A drop on the far side that ran down into a ravine that ran down to the river. She said, "Where do we wait?" He said, "The rocks." They tied the horses behind a screen of scrub. They climbed the rocks. The rocks were warm from the sun. The sky was the kind of blue that hurt your eyes. He laid his rifle across a flat stone. He took a long look at the road. He took a longer look at her. He said, "Eleanor." She said, "Yes." He said, "There is a way this goes that I do not want to go." She said, "Which way?" He said, "I have been a man who has shot men before. I do not want to be that man this afternoon if I do not have to be." She said, "Then do not be." He said, "If they fire first." She said, "Then you do what you have to do. And I will be behind that rock there. Not in your way." He looked at her. He said, "You are not in my way." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The wagon came around the bend 40 minutes later. It was a small wagon, a canvas top, 2 mules, a driver in a black coat, 2 riders ahead, a rider behind, and in the back between bundles, a thin woman with a bun and frightened eyes, sitting upright, tied at the wrists. Eleanor saw her face. The face was alive. The face was alive, but the face had been hit. Recently. The mouth was swollen on the left side. Eleanor felt the heat come up her neck. She did not say a word. Caleb said very quietly, "Stay down." She stayed down. He raised the rifle. He did not fire. He waited. The wagon came closer. The lead rider looked bored. He was scanning the road. He was not scanning the rocks. The wagon came past the cottonwood. The wagon came past the red rock. The wagon came past where Caleb and Eleanor lay flat. And Caleb stood up. Caleb stood up on the rock and he leveled the rifle at the lead rider, and he said in a voice that carried across the canyon like a dropped stone, "Stop the wagon!" The lad rider froze. The driver in the black coat half rose. The rider behind the wagon reached for his gun. Caleb said, "Do not." The man's hand hovered. "Did not draw further." Caleb said, "Cut the woman loose. Set her on the road. Turn the wagon around. Ride south. Do not come back." The lead rider said, "Hawthorne." "Mr. Vaughn." Caleb said, "Is not here. You are here. Make a choice." The lead rider looked at the second rider. The second rider looked at the driver. The driver looked at the housekeeper in the back of the wagon. The housekeeper said very softly 3 words that Eleanor heard from the rocks. "He is coming." The lead rider's eyes flicked north. Eleanor turned her head. She saw it. Behind the wagon, coming hard on the road they had just left. A heavy-set man on a black horse. 2 more behind him. Vaughn had not stayed with the wagon. Vaughn had ridden ahead of the wagon and circled back. Vaughn had been hunting Caleb the whole morning the same way Caleb had been hunting Vaughn. Caleb said very quietly under his breath, "So." He swung the rifle north. He fired 1 shot. Not at Vaughn. Above Vaughn, the shot hit the rock above the road, splinters of stone. The black horse reared. Vaughn nearly went off. Caleb said in his caring voice, Vaughn. Vaughn steadied his horse. Vaughn looked up at the rocks. He saw Caleb. He saw a second figure behind Caleb. He could not make out the figure's face. He smiled. It was the first smile of a man who has been waiting 2 years for a fight. Vaughn called up Mr. Hawthorne. I was hoping you would come down off your mountain. Caleb said, cut the woman loose. Vaughn said, you should not have brought my bride. Caleb said, I did not bring her. She came. Vaughn's eyes went past Caleb. They found Eleanor. Eleanor stood up. She did not mean to. She did. She stood up on the rock, and the wind moved her hair in her dress, and she looked down at Bartholomew Vaughn from 40 feet of red Colorado stone, and she said in a voice that did not shake, my name is Eleanor Bell. You killed my father. Vaughn's smile did not move, but his eyes moved. His eyes moved the way the eyes of a card player move when the card he is holding turns out to be a card he did not deal himself. He said, Miss Bell, you are mistaken. She said, I am not. He said, you are tired. You have been deceived by these men. Come down. We shall sort it out. She said, you forged my father's correspondence. You sent the $80. You bought my ticket before I answered. You went to Boston in August. You paid the doctor $20 to write pneumonia. There is a boy named Aaron with a notebook. There is a reverend named Pike with a copy of that notebook. There is a federal marshal in Denver named Kane who has a wire from Wyatt Hawthorne. There is a seamstress named Bryn with a sister named Margaret. There is a woman in your wagon with a swollen mouth. The road was very quiet. The mules stamped. The wind moved. Vaughn said, Miss Bell, you are a delicate young woman in a difficult country. Eleanor said, I am 22 years old. I am the daughter of Thaddeus Bell. I am not delicate. I am not in a difficult country. I am exactly where I am meant to be. Vaughn said, then I am very sorry. He drew his pistol. He did not aim at Caleb. He aimed at Eleanor. Caleb fired first. Vaughn fired second. The rider behind the wagon, the one whose hand had been hovering for 10 minutes, the man who had been listening to the housekeeper say he is coming, made his choice. He drew. He fired third. All 3 shots inside 1 heartbeat. Vaughn's shot went wide of Eleanor by a foot. Caleb's shot took Vaughn's wrist. Vaughn's own man's shot took Vaughn's shoulder. Vaughn went off the black horse hard. He landed in the road on his back. He did not get up. The 2 men behind him froze. The lead rider of the wagon raised his hands. The second rider raised his hands. The driver of the wagon, who had been a coward his whole life and knew it, slid off the wagon seat and lay flat on the road with his hands behind his head. The rider who had shot Vaughn dropped the gun out of his hand. The gun hit the dirt. He raised both hands. He said, I am done. The housekeeper in the wagon began to weep without sound. Eleanor stood on the rock. She did not move. She did not lower her chin. She did not breathe in for the count of 6. Then she breathed. Caleb said beside her very softly, Eleanor. She said, I am all right. He said, sit down. She said, I will in a minute. She did not sit down. She walked down off the rock, step by step, her hand on the rope they had climbed. She walked to the wagon. She climbed into the back of the wagon. She knelt beside the housekeeper. She said, what is your name? The housekeeper said, Hannah Tate. Eleanor said, Hannah. I am Eleanor. We are going to get you out of here. Will you let me untie your hands? Hannah Tate nodded. Eleanor untied her hands. Her wrists were raw. Eleanor took the flask from the satchel. She poured water onto a corner of her own sleeve. She pressed it to Hannah Tate's split mouth. Hannah Tate began to cry openly. She said, I tried to leave last night. I know he caught me. I know. She said, he killed Margaret. He killed 3 more I knew of and 4 I did not. He told me he would kill me if I spoke. Eleanor said, Hannah, he is going to live. He is going to live a long time. In a cell. Hannah Tate said, oh. She said it the way a woman says it when a sentence she has carried in her chest for a long time becomes air. Caleb climbed into the wagon. He looked at Vaughn's wound from a distance. Caleb said, he will live. Wrist and shoulder. Painful. Not mortal. Eleanor said, good. He looked at her. She said, I want him in front of a judge. He said he will be. The man who had shot Vaughn was standing in the road with his hands up. He was younger than Eleanor had thought from the rocks, 30 maybe. He had a scar across his chin. He looked at Caleb. He said, I have been with him 11 months. I rode for the wages. I did not ride for this. Caleb said, you will tell that to Marshal Kane. The man said, I will. Caleb said, what is your name? The man said, Wilkes. Tom Wilkes. Caleb said, Mr. Wilkes, tie your boss's hands. Mind the wound. Do not let him die on me. Wilkes said, yes, sir. He tied Vaughn's hands. Vaughn was conscious. He was pale. Vaughn looked up from the road. He looked at Eleanor. He said in a voice not as smooth as it had been at the platform, Miss Bell. Eleanor said, Mr. Vaughn, he said, your father played a very poor game of cards. She said, my father did not play cards. He said, he played me. She said, he did not play you. He simply did not pay you. There is a difference. The difference is that he was an honest man. Vaughn closed his eyes. He said, a small woman. Eleanor said, 22 years old. He said, a small woman with a long memory. She said, yes. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. She had already said everything she needed to say to Bartholomew Vaughn on top of a red rock in a Colorado canyon. Anything more would be too much. She climbed out of the wagon. She walked back to the chestnut mare. She put her hand on the mare's neck. The mare nuzzled her shoulder. She found that her knees were shaking. She let them shake. She put her face into the mare's neck and she shook for 1 full minute. Then she stopped. Because she had a wagon to get back to Hawthorne Ridge, and she had a housekeeper who needed bandages, and she had a long plain wool dress to wear to Denver next week. Wyatt and Marshal Kane and 2 deputies met them at the pass at sundown. Wyatt looked at Eleanor. He looked at his brother. He looked at the wagon. He looked at Vaughn, who was tied at the wrist with a bandage already on his shoulder that Eleanor had put on with Hannah Tate's hands shaking next to hers. Wyatt said, I missed something. Caleb said, you missed everything. Marshal Augustus Kane was 62 years old. White hair, a long thin nose, a federal star pinned to a brown vest. He had buried his wife 3 winters ago. He had a granddaughter in Denver who was 12. He had been in Pueblo on circuit court business when the wire reached him. He had ridden west since dawn. He swung down off his horse. He looked at Eleanor. He took off his hat. He said, Miss Bell. She said, Marshal Kane. He said, I rode all night. She said, thank you. He said, you held this man until I got here. She said, Caleb held him. I just spoke to him. Marshal Kane looked at Caleb. He looked at the wagon. He looked at Hannah Tate, who was bundled in Eleanor's shawl now. He said to Eleanor, Miss Bell, whatever you said to him from that rock, I would have liked to hear it. Eleanor said, I told him my name. Marshal Kane said, that is usually enough. He smiled at her. It was the first time anyone had smiled at her since Boston that did not want something from her. She felt her eyes burn. She nodded once. She walked away to the chestnut mare, and she put her hand on the mare's neck again, and she breathed in and out for a long count. Behind her, Caleb was telling Marshal Kane everything in short, flat sentences, and Wyatt was checking Hannah Tate's mouth, and the 2 deputies were lifting Vaughn into the back of the wagon. The sun went down. The mountains went purple. The coal came up out of the ground. Marshal Kane said to Caleb, we will take him to Denver tonight. 3 of us, 2 prisoners. We will be there by tomorrow noon. Caleb said, I will come down for the hearing. Marshal Kane said, you and Miss Bell both. Within a week. Caleb said, we will be there. Marshal Kane looked at Eleanor across the wagon. He said, "Miss Bell?" She said, "Yes." He said, "In all my years, I have wanted a witness who could sit in front of a jury and not blink. I think I have one." She did not say anything. She just nodded. She did not trust her voice anymore. She had used it all on the rock. The riders moved out east toward Denver with Vaughn in the wagon and Hannah Tate riding on the seat between Marshal Kane and a deputy. Caleb and Wyatt and Eleanor rode west, back toward the mountain. It took them 4 hours. The night was clear and very cold. A bowl of stars came down to the tops of the pines and looked at them. Halfway up the mountain, Wyatt said, "There are wires waiting for us at the house." Caleb said, "From Sacramento." Wyatt said, "From Sacramento." Caleb did not say anything. He rode a little faster. The wires were on the kitchen table. 2 of them. Martha had set them in the middle of the table under a tin cup. She had a pot of stew on the stove. She had bread cooling on the rack. She had not gone to bed. She had been waiting at the kitchen window since dark. When they walked in, she looked at all 3 of them. She looked at Eleanor. Then she sat down at the kitchen table herself. She said, "I am too old to be standing for this." Caleb picked up the first wire. He read it once. He set it down. He picked up the second one. He read it. He set it down. He put his hands flat on the kitchen table and he closed his eyes. For a long time, nobody said anything. Then Caleb said, very low, "She is alive." Wyatt said, "We knew." Caleb said, "She is well." Wyatt said, "Sacramento." Caleb said, "Married to a carpenter. He is good to her. She has a daughter, 6 years old, named after our mother." Eleanor's throat closed. She did not know Sarah Hawthorne. She would not know her for another month. She had not in her life met a daughter named after a mother she had not known either. But she had been a daughter to a father who was now in the ground. And she understood, in that kitchen at midnight on the 4th of October, 1882, what it meant for a man to learn that the sister he had buried with an empty coffin had been alive in a kitchen in Sacramento for 8 years. She understood why Caleb's hand stayed flat on the table. He was holding the table down. Because if he had not, he might have lifted it. Wyatt put his hand on Caleb's shoulder. He did not say anything. Martha said, "He kept her from you." Caleb said, "Yes." Martha said, "He used her name to keep you quiet about Margaret Bryn and the 7 others." Caleb said, "Yes." Martha said, 2 years. Caleb said, 2 years. Martha said, "Caleb Hawthorne, now you listen to me." He looked at her. She said, "You go down to Denver. You sit in that courtroom. You tell the judge every name in Aaron's notebook. You let Eleanor say her piece. You let Hannah Tate say hers. You let Mrs. Bryn say hers. And then you come home. You come home, Caleb Hawthorne. You come home and you write to your sister and you ask her if she will come east in the spring. You hear me?" He said, "I hear you." Martha said, "And then you sit down at this table with this girl from Boston and you sort out the rest of it. Because I am too old to be the only woman in this kitchen. Do you hear me?" Caleb did not look at Eleanor. He said, "I hear you." Eleanor felt her face go hot. She did not look at him either. Wyatt cleared his throat. Wyatt said, "I am going to bed." Martha said, "You are going to eat first." Wyatt said, "Yes, ma am." He sat down. He ate. Caleb sat down. He did not eat. Martha put a bowl in front of him anyway. He looked at the bowl. He picked up the spoon. He ate. Eleanor ate too. 3 people at a kitchen table at midnight, eating Martha's stew, saying nothing. It was the warmest room Eleanor had been in since her father had played the Chopin Nocturne in August. When Wyatt had gone up to bed and the dishes were stacked in the basin, Martha said, "I am for my own bed." She put her hand on Eleanor's shoulder as she passed. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Then it was Eleanor and Caleb in the kitchen. The kitchen was very still. Caleb said, "Eleanor, Yes. He said, I am going to say a thing I do not know how to say. She said, all right. He said, I am 46 years old. She said, I know. He said, you are 22. She said, I know. He said, I am a widower. I am a man who has buried a wife and a son and grieved a sister and run a ranch and hunted a killer for 2 years. I am a man who has, in the last 48 hours, finally set some of that down. And I am sitting at my kitchen table looking at a woman from Boston who has been on my mountain one night and who today stood up on a red rock in a canyon and named her father out loud in front of the man who killed him. And I do not know what to do with that. She said, you do not have to do anything with it. He said, I think I do. She said, Caleb. He said, yes. She said, you promised me. Last night. No half-truths. So I am going to ask you the question I am going to ask you, and you are going to answer me plain. He said, ask. She said, are you going to ask me to be your wife because I am the daughter of the man you owed your life to? He said, no. She said, are you going to ask me because Vaughn intercepted a notice that was meant to be a trap? He said, no. She said, then why are you going to ask me? He said, I am not. Not tonight, not next week, not until Denver is done and Vaughn is in a cell and Hannah Tate is in a safe place and Sarah has had her time and you have had your time. I am not asking you in this kitchen tonight. I am telling you what I do not yet know how to say. I am telling you so that you know the answer to a question I have not asked you when I ask it will not surprise you. She said, and what is the answer I will not be surprised by? He said, I will ask you to be my wife, not because of your father or my debts or any trap. I will ask you because I watched you climb down off that rock today and walk to a wagon and untie a strange woman's hands and not faint and not cry and not stop. I will ask you because in 2 days you have become the only person in this house I want to sit across this table from. She did not say anything. She did not move. The fire ticked into ash. He said, you do not have to answer me. I have not asked. She said, I will not answer you, because you have not asked. He said, fair. She stood up. She walked to the doorway. She turned. She said, Caleb. Yes. She said, when you ask me, whenever that is, make sure you ask me on a porch. He said, a porch. She said, not in a kitchen, not in a courtroom, not on a horse, on a porch, with your hat in your hand. He said, I will. She said, good night. He said, good night, Eleanor. She went up the stairs. She bolted her door. She lay down on top of the quilt. She did not sleep. She thought about the chestnut mare's neck. She thought about Hannah Tate's wrists. She thought about Vaughn's eyes when he heard her say her name. She thought about a sister in Sacramento with a daughter named for a mother she had never met. She thought about a porch. She thought about her father. She thought Papa. She thought, Papa, I did what you said. I found him. I named him out loud. I am tired. I am still here. The wind moved against the side of the house. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. She knew only what she had said on the rock. My name is Eleanor Bell. You killed my father. She had said it. The mountain had heard her. The mountain had not flinched. And the woman in the four-poster bed slept for the first time in 3 nights with the slow, steady breathing of a person who has finally at last picked the right fight.